Greetings, music students. It's good to see you again. I'm in the process of moving out of my office here at Brigham Young University. I've been in this office for close to 30 years. I was in a different office for a few years before that. Now I'm moving out, and one of the hardest things about moving out of this office is, of course, I have to migrate its contents to my house. And a real tricky part is moving this group of albums, these 12-inch black discs, to my house. I went and counted at home earlier this morning and determined that even though this looks like a lot of albums, well, I guess it is a lot of albums, I have 39 times more than this in my archive at home. So when this goes back to our house, this will be 1/40th of my album collection. I'm not even counting smaller formatted things. I'm not counting CDs and so on, but just these 12-inch black flexible discs. Each of these is a kind of recorded suite. That is to say, it's got multiple tracks on it. And as we talked about last time with respect to suites, they're organized in various ways, thematically, by composer or artist in some cases, etc. Okay. I could talk to you a lot about my life in the world of albums, but first let me actually define a couple of terms. I've used the word album a few times, and an album is usually some kind of bound collection of things that you're looking at, in this case, listening to. You've all played music from albums of sheet music, I'm sure. So, here's a book, A Treasury of Stephen Foster. And you flip through this, got a lot of songs in it. You've probably played from albums of, might be Chopin if you're a pianist. It might be a collection of Italian arias if you're a vocalist. In fact, if you're a vocalist, I'm sure you've sung from a collection of Italian vocal pieces. But this idea of an album moved into recordings in a variety of ways. And now I'd love to talk about the history of recordings. I've got a lot of artifacts here I could do that with. It would be a long lesson and I'd have to be a lot better prepared. But let me just point out to you that in the days of, let's say, my parents' generation, it was standard to have 10-inch shellac, hard, brittle discs that played at 78 RPM, that is rotations per minute. And you could get about 3.5 minutes on each side of those two-sided discs. Wasn't very much. Wasn't really good for classical music, obviously, because most classical music you'd need longer than that. Popular songs, it was pretty good. So when you wanted to combine those to have a longer set, whether to give you a whole a piece of classical music like a symphony or something, you'd have to have multiple discs in that. Or if you want to have a collection of popular songs by a particular artist, let's say, singing them, or, you'd get an actual album like this. So you can see here, these are these 10-inch black discs that I referred to that are very brittle, they're heavy, and here we have a collection of folk songs by Richard Dyer Bennett. 20th Century Minstrel, it says. This is a real album in the sense that album is usually used. Well, in 1948, Columbia Records began to produce, and again, a lot of interesting history behind that, but they began to produce LPs, that is to say, long-playing albums, which meant a single 12-inch disc, somewhat more flexible, not brittle, not heavy, in which you could get maybe 15 to as much as 25 minutes on a side of a single disc. It was great for classical music. It was also very good for popular music to combine a lot of different songs by a particular artist, let's say. I want to show you a few albums here as I'm going through this. Let's see. So you had smaller albums like this that were just 4 tracks. These were called extended plays. These weren't the 12-inch ones. But look, Rock and Roll, Bill Haley and the Comets. Rock Around the Clock was on this. You had, well, those for kids too. Look at Daddy Ed's original Kitty album with 4 songs on it. So the 4-song format pretty common for those little 7-inch discs. And then you'd have these 10-inch discs like this, which here's the Les Paul and Mary Ford. And here we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These were now playing at 33 RPM, 33 rotations per minute. So you could get a lot of stuff in here. Even though this is only 10 inches, it's not that LP format that is 12 inches in diameter that we'll be talking about primarily. The descendants of these albums, as you know, albums could take the shape of reel-to-reel tapes. I used to get these a lot as a kid. Here's a Beatles one, Yesterday and Today. Cassettes came along. Here's one. This is a spoken word album. This is Merrill Osmond, Looking Back, Personal Experiences and Testimony. And you can see it's a little cassette there. Some of you may have used cassettes and counted them. They sort of go in and out of fashion, but they were the dominant album format for some years, 1970s-ish, you know. Here's a look at this. This is a 3-cassette album of Prince's, or in this case, the artist formerly known as Prince at the time. Emancipation. Contains 3 cassettes. It's still sealed. I'm never opening that one. 8-track tapes. You've seen these, heard of these. These were for use primarily in automobiles. It's a complicated format, but you read more about those at your leisure. Then we got into compact discs, and those were sold in these long boxes for years. The reason being that the more portable and small any kind of product is, the easier it is to steal. And so this was thought to be a way of preventing people from stealing these, because it's really hard to carry these. Now, I'll just say that when I was a kid, I was 13, I actually stole a lot of albums. I shoplifted a lot of them. And I did that with Hal's Record Store in Los Altos, California, and the Co-op drugstore, both of them now out of business. I hope not thanks to me. I'm sure there was more involved. But yeah, drugstores sold these albums in those days. And there's just 2 things I want to say about it. First, although I did spend a night in jail for thievery when I was 13, it wasn't for records. And I'll just say that that's a closed chapter in my life. I'll just give this teaser. How you shoplift these is an interesting process, and I have great stories to tell about that, but I'm not going to tell them to you here today. The second thing I want to say at this point is there's a lot of stealing of albums that's going on today, digitally or by making illegal copies of compact discs and so forth. There's always been that kind of thievery, taping albums and so on. Now, you are in an era in which you're creating your own albums. You're creating your own suites of material. Not all the time, but I think most of the time you work with playlists. You're creating albums of things that have meaning for you or great interest to you or whatever it might be. So you're doing the kind of thing that was done way back in the front end of the 19th century. You're creating your own sort of binders volumes. These volumes were where people would take sheet music that they liked, individual sheets, different composers, different styles sometimes. Usually pianists would do this, and then bind them together so that they had their own album of material. This was stuff that was meaningful to the owner. It's a great sociological discussion to talk about this kind of binder's volume, putting things together that relate to your identity, to the owner's identity. Same kind of thing with playlists. It's a very interesting sociological, as I say, if not musicological study waiting to be done. Now, let me just go back to this collection and point out to you the different ways in which tracks are combined onto an album, such as these. So the first album that I ever got, it was not the Beatles or some interesting pop music. It was this. It was the soundtrack to the Pink Panther, 1964. I loved the movie. And I went to the hi-fi store with my mom. She said, I'll buy you a record for your birthday. And it was this. And it's kind of a suite of things from the movie here. Vocal, instrumental, whatnot. The second album that I remember getting, at least, is this one. This is music and some spoken dialogue from the soundtrack of one of my favorite shows of the time, Batman, the TV series. Now, as I look through these albums here, I'll just pull a few out, and you'll see the different kinds of combinations that you have in LPs, these kinds of record albums. So let's see. Okay, so the Police, Synchronicity. So the Police recorded all these songs. They're all written by themselves. I don't think there's any so-called cover versions on this. I'd have to double check, but I'm almost certain not. They then put them together in a particular order, two sides. So it's kind of a two-act phenomenon here. Side A, side B. And the act of turning a record over was a very interesting formal interaction with an album, because the A side had a beginning and an ending, and the way it began and the way it ended, very important. Same thing with the B side. When you get to compact discs or other digital formats where it's all continuous, that part is missing. So there's a formal interest that has disappeared. It's sad when you have particularly albums from the past, like Synchronicity, if you get the compact disc version of it or whatever digital version, you're going to miss that side A, side B, act one, act two feeling. Anyway, this one, okay, so this is all by a single artist here. I mention this because I love Janice Ian, one of the great singer-songwriters of the American Songbook that she's helped create. This is her first album. This is a Polydor one. It's been re-released. I think it was also on Verve, the label Verve. But in any case, terrific artist. And her song Society's Child was her sort of initiation, just this sort of wonderful breakthrough into the world of popular music. Anyway, so these are songs written by her, recorded by her, maybe with some other artists. The people who produced it and helped work out the order of the tracks on the album were creating, again, a form to this particular suite of pieces. So here's one. Look at this. Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition. Songs of World Wars I and II. And you can see it's just a variety of recordings assembled here as an anthology. The theme, of course, is these wartime songs. That Praise the Lord, by the way, Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition, that was the name of an extremely popular song of that era. In my youth, my high school years, we, a few friends of mine and I, would go each Sunday to Agnew State Hospital in the Bay Area in California and sing with patients there. It was basically a hospital for the mentally ill. And the older folks there all knew and wanted to sing Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition all the time. So, big time song. Here's another one. Look at this. So this is Stokowski, Night on Bald Mountain. It has this wonderful illustration on the cover. So Stokowski and his symphony orchestra, and it's a number of sort of East European, mostly Russian, maybe all Russian pieces put together here. So the theme or the control is Eastern Europe and a certain kind of classical music. Here's one, Guitar Transcriptions of Compositions by J.S. Bach. So here's the composer, of course, being played by someone else, and these are pieces of his transcribed for guitar and put together on this album. Here's, Francis Poulenc, Complete Music for Wind Instruments and Piano. It's all here. All the pieces are on this album. This one, by the way, is a gatefold, which means that it opens up and there's lots of text on the inside. Sometimes you'd have illustrations or other kinds of things on the interior. It wouldn't have to be a double album, as this one is, to be a gatefold album. Let's see. Here's this one, The New Spirit of Angel, Angel being a record label. It's a gatefold cover, you can see here, but it's just one album inside. It's not a double album. Anyway, just a footnote on format there. Oh, look here's an oldie. This is an old Columbia Masterworks recording here. Lord Berners. You probably don't know Lord Berners as a composer, but he was kind of a big deal mid-century in Europe, the UK, a little bit here. So this album has his Triumph of Neptune on one side, and on the other side, Richard Arnell's Punch and the Child. I've never listened to this album, but maybe in all my retirement years, I'll find a niche where I can spend some time with that particular recording. Here's an American triptych, the Greg Smith Singers. So it's all performed by this one group. The theme is American composers, and it's particularly at the time contemporary American composers that not similar in style, but kind of the same generation, and all a little bit modernist, kind of what you had in this country in the mid-20th century. So we've got Copland here, you know him, William Schumann, you may know him, not Robert Schumann, that's a 19th century, of course, German composer, and Samuel Barber. I think all of you have played or know the work of Samuel Barber. Look, here's Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this is a suite that is now recorded of passages from the film Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's no songs in this one. It's not like Pink Panther, which had at least one song on it. I think a couple of songs, actually. This is just instrumental music. There's no love theme from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And last time I sang a little bit of Tony Bennett's just monumental hit song, I Left My Heart in San Francisco. And here we have Tony Bennett's all-time greatest hits. So it's a single artist. He didn't have anything to do with writing the songs, but he performs them. He has his own interpretation of them. It is a double album in a gatefold, as you can see. And, of course, the very first one is I Left My Heart in San Francisco, because that was by far his biggest hit. We'll do one more here. After the Ball. A treasury of turn-of-the-century popular songs. So, not a single composer, it's the same duo performing this suite of pieces, but the organizing feature is they're popular songs from that era, so we'll put them together on a record. So you can see how these songs evoke these albums evoke a particular artistic vision of, say, a popular group, or they collect material from a single film, or could be a play, could be recording suites from ballets. We talked about those a little bit last time. It can be organized around a time period. It can be organized around styles, or that American thing. Americana always has its champions, things that are American, however you define American, besides within the northern and southern hemispheres of the Western Hemisphere, because that's all America, really. But usually American, we mean the United States of America. So just a little intro here to albums before I pack these up and haul them away. Understand that these are really important kinds of multi-piece collections or multi-piece sets. They are preserved in a particular order, and you can sample through them. You can play one side or play one track from one side, however you want to do it. But they were constructed to be an album. Each of these is an album, meaning it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And what I'd like you to do for your assignment for next time is to do two things, actually. So here's the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. One of the most famous so-called concept albums. That's a whole discussion in itself. This is an early mono copy of it with this original insert here, the inner sleeve. Anyway, sorry, I'm nerding out a bit too much on this, but this album you were meant to listen to from beginning to end. I remember when it came out, June 1967, Bill Westrom and I got together. He had a record player, I didn't at the time. I went to his house. We put it on, played side A, side, gasped, played side B. And at the end, we were just stunned by this album. It was like nothing we'd ever heard before. And this is one of those moments that you never forget, I guess. Well, this album has been interpreted, written about for so many decades now. I'd like you to go online and listen to, I guess, and watch, to get a YouTube recording of Allen Ginsberg explaining the narrative process and the sort of thematic elements that move one to the next in that particular album. I'll send you a link to that, but it's easy to find. Allen Ginsberg, great poet, doing his best to make sense out of this whole album as a progression of ideas, a kind of narrative in itself. It's quite brilliant and also kind of a little crazy. The second thing I want you to do, though, is to actually listen to an album, not your own playlist, but an album as designed by a popular artist or group, not a greatest hits or, an anthology of a lot of different groups or something, but just as I showed you the Police recording there, some group that you favor. There's so many now that I'm unaware of that you are aware of and that you probably cherish. Go to an album and listen from beginning to end of that album. Don't put it on shuffle or anything like that, because I want you to hear it as it was designed by its maker or makers. And I think it will be a little bit of a revelatory experience for you. I say that partly based on doing this with students over the years. They know all the songs, they have their favorites, they might have extracted some, put them on their playlist. But when I tell them, listen to the actual album from beginning to end and write about it, tell me what you experienced in the same way that Allen Ginsberg does with Sgt. Pepper's. You figure out, what are the moods? What are the motions that are made here from loud to soft, from fast to slow, from this kind of, we'll say, emotional temperature to that kind of emotional temperature? I hope it will be a really good experience for you. So I want you to do that. I want you to watch the Ginsberg and then select an album, probably of popular music, because classical music tends to not have too many different tracks on an album, okay? So I would pick some kind of popular group or individual artist and write something about the length of what you hear Allen Ginsberg reading, or it doesn't read it, I guess, but it's saying, extemporizing about Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That's your assignment. I think it will be a good experience for you. And apparently you've got a lot of time these days because you're sheltering in place or you're somehow being withheld from going out to, say, a record store, which is where I'd probably be today if I weren't here trying to figure out how to get these home and where on earth I'm going to put them once they're there. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and I miss you. I'll see you sometime, I hope. Bye.